I arrived at the Airbnb around 7 p.m., just as the sun was beginning to set behind the old building. It was one of those places that looked like it had a story to tell, small, tucked away on a quiet street, away from the bustle of the city. The building itself was an old brownstone, and there was something about the way the bricks were weathered, like it had seen generations of people come and go. I remember thinking it was exactly what I needed. I'd been on the road for hours and just wanted a quiet, peaceful place to crash for the night. The host's instructions were simple. Come on in, the door will be unlocked. Just make yourself at home. I took the key out of the lockbox, stepping inside. The apartment was small but cozy. A soft amber glow from the vintage lamps lit up the living room, where old paintings in heavy frames lined the walls. There were faded rugs on the floor, and a small but well-kept kitchen area to the right. The whole place had an odd charm to it, like stepping back in time. I could smell cookies as soon as I walked in, the kind of smell that makes you feel like you've just stepped into a warm family kitchen. Even though there was no one around, I was immediately at ease, feeling comfortable and almost like I had walked into someone's home. The scent lingered in the air, mixed with the faint smell of wood and a touch of something floral, maybe from the vases of dried flowers in the corners of the room. There was no hint of anything strange, nothing to give me the feeling that anything was off. The place was pristine, and everything was in its right place, almost too perfect. The host's message said to feel free to relax and make myself at home. So I dropped my bag on the couch and took a moment to breathe. I hadn't realized how long I'd been on the road, but now that I was settled, I just wanted to rest. The vintage vibe of the apartment was comforting, and I decided to get comfortable, unpack a few things, and check out the amenities. As I explored the apartment, I noticed a small dining area beside the kitchen. It was cute, barely big enough for two people, with a single square wooden table. The walls were covered in a soft, off-white paint, chipped in a few places but giving the whole place an authentic old-world feel. There were bookshelves scattered with old, leather-bound books and knickknacks from a different time. The paintings, mostly landscapes and still lives, looked like they had been collected over the years. Each one was different, but they shared a certain old-world style. I poured myself a drink and decided to sit on the couch and unwind, scrolling through my phone for a bit. The quiet of the apartment was almost too much, though. There was no hum of traffic, no background noise from other tenants. Nothing. It was like I was in a completely different world, cut off from everything else. I had stayed in quiet places before, but this was different. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the air itself was thick with something unspoken. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was just me, adjusting to the solitude of being alone after so many hours on the road. I figured I'd get used to it, and I tried to focus on my phone. But as the evening wore on, that feeling of being watched, though subtle, started to gnaw at the back of my mind. I chalked it up to exhaustion. It had been a long drive, and I was likely imagining things. The evening wore on, and I ended up making a simple dinner in the small kitchen. Everything felt normal enough. The apartment was still warm, and I even caught myself relaxing. I turned on the TV to watch a show, trying to distract myself from the creeping unease. But the more I tried to push it aside, the more it settled in my bones. Something wasn't right here. As the sun sank completely behind the buildings outside, the apartment grew darker. The soft golden light from the lamps didn't seem as warm anymore. It was as if the darkness outside had seeped into the apartment, despite the lights still being on. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed deeper somehow. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the apartment felt wrong. I tried to shake it off, but that feeling of being watched, of something being just out of sight, never quite left. It was only when I finally decided to go to bed that it really hit me. I lay down in the bed, hoping that sleep would come easily. The bed was comfortable, soft, with thick, old quilts tucked neatly around the mattress. I pulled the covers up and tried to settle in, hoping to drift off. But then, just as I was about to close my eyes, I saw it. A shadow, just barely noticeable at first, but moving. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, thinking it was my mind playing tricks on me. But it wasn't. The shadow moved slowly, gliding across the far wall of the room, from one corner to the other. It was too slow to be a trick of the light, and it was far too defined to be my imagination. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was silent, utterly silent, except for the faint creak of the old floorboards beneath me. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the shadow. It wasn't a normal shadow. It wasn't from any furniture or object in the room, but it was there, moving across the wall like it belonged. It stretched and shifted, almost like it was alive. I stayed still, too scared to make a sound. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for. Maybe that the shadow would disappear if I ignored it. Maybe if I stayed perfectly still, whatever it was wouldn't notice me. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound, but I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, a deafening rhythm that made the silence seem even more suffocating. The shadow moved across the wall, getting closer to the bed, and I thought I saw it stretch, almost as though it were reaching out. I wasn't sure if it was my mind playing tricks or if it was real, but it was there, right in front of me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and my breath came in shallow gasps. I wanted to reach for my phone, call the host, or even call the police, but I couldn't move. I tried to tell myself that it was just the old building settling, creaking. Maybe it was the light playing tricks on me, but I knew deep down that I was lying to myself. This wasn't normal. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to move. I reached over to grab my phone from the nightstand, but when I tried to make the call, the line went dead. I stared at the screen, confused, but before I could think more about it, I heard it. The front door creaked open. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands were shaking, but I had no choice. I had to lock the door. The shadow, which had stopped moving, suddenly began again. It moved slowly towards the door, just outside my sight. I could hear faint footsteps now, soft, almost imperceptible. I jumped out of bed, trying to stay as quiet as possible, and rushed to lock the door. The handle rattled slightly as I turned the key. The footsteps outside stopped, and the shadow, just barely visible from the corner of the room, went still. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was the kind of silence that made my skin crawl, like something was waiting, watching. I didn't dare sleep after that. I stayed awake, listening for any sounds, staring at the door, praying that whoever or whatever was outside would leave. But no more sounds came, no more footsteps. The apartment was still, too still. The next morning, I packed up in a hurry. I didn't care that I had barely slept or that I was exhausted from the trip. I was out of there. When I reached the door, I expected to see the host, maybe apologize for not being around, but the apartment was silent, as though no one had been there at all. The key was still in the lock, and the door clicked softly as I pushed it open. I left without a word. The feeling of being watched never left, not even when I stepped out into the daylight. Even as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been waiting for me in that apartment. Something that wasn't going to let me forget the night I spent in that too quiet place. I never looked up the listing again. We had been planning the trip for months. Just a weekend getaway to relax, catch up, and enjoy some time away from the stresses of daily life. The farmhouse we rented was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by fields and trees, far from the nearest town. When we pulled up, the house looked exactly like something out of an old mystery novel, huge, sprawling, with a sagging roof and weathered wood. It had that eerie charm, the kind that makes you want to poke around, see what secrets it holds, but also makes you wonder what those secrets might be. The host, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair and glasses, greeted us at the door with a warm smile. Her name was Mrs. Williams. She seemed nice, but there was something a little off about her. Something in the way she spoke or the way she looked at the house, like she wasn't fully comfortable there either. She gave us a quick tour, showing us the kitchen, the living room, and the bedrooms. All of it was old. Some of the furniture looked like it came straight out of a history book, but it was charming in its own way, with high ceilings, creaky wooden floors, and windows that let in just enough light to make everything look dusty but cozy. The whole house had that smell of age, the kind of smell you get when something has been standing for a century. It was a mix of wood, old books, and something faintly musty. But honestly, I didn't mind it. It made the house feel lived in, like it had a soul. Before she left, Mrs. Williams gave us one last warning. "Now, there's one thing I have to tell you," she said, her voice dropping a little. "Stay out of the basement. It's not in the best condition, and I'd rather you not go down there. Just keep to the main floors. All right?" She smiled again, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. We all nodded, not thinking much of it. People always have one room in their house they don't want guests in, right? It's probably nothing, we thought. After she left, we unpacked our bags and settled in, enjoying the quiet and the strange peace of being in the middle of nowhere. It was perfect. But then, later that evening, the curiosity got the better of us. After dinner, we were sitting around the living room, talking about random stuff when one of my friends, Mark, who's always the one to suggest things we probably shouldn't do, mentioned the basement. "You know, she told us to stay out of the basement, right?" he said with a grin. I glanced over at the heavy door at the end of the hallway. It had a rusty doorknob and looked as if it hadn't been touched in years. Something about it seemed almost secretive. We hadn't really thought about it until now. But as soon as Mark mentioned it, we all stared at it for a few moments, wondering what was down there. "You know what would be funny?" Sarah said, rolling her eyes. "If we went down there anyway." We laughed, but that laugh had a nervous edge to it. We all knew it wasn't the best idea, but the temptation was too strong. We wanted to know what was behind that door. After all, it was just a basement, right? What could go wrong? So, after a few more minutes of trying to convince ourselves it was fine, we grabbed a flashlight and made our way down the hall. The door groaned as I turned the knob and pulled it open. The sound of old wood scraping against itself echoed through the quiet house. There was no light down there, only darkness. I shined the flashlight toward the stairs, but they were steep, narrow, and coated in a thick layer of dust. As I took the first step, a cold draft hit me. Unsettling because the rest of the house was warm and cozy. It felt like it came from deep inside the basement, like it had been there for years, trapped beneath the floorboards. I shivered and glanced back at the others, who were already following me down. The flashlight flickered for a moment, and I cursed under my breath, shaking it to get it working properly. The basement smelled old, musty, and something else. There was a metallic tang in the air, almost like blood, but not exactly. It made my stomach turn. I pushed the thought aside as I shone the light around. The walls were lined with old, peeling newspaper clippings. They were yellowed with age, some of them faded to the point of being unreadable, but others were recent. There were headlines written in bold, black ink, but I couldn't make out the words. Something about them didn't feel right, like they didn't belong there. I took a few more steps in, the sound of my boots crunching on the concrete floor echoing in the silence. The room was filled with old furniture. Chairs, tables, and boxes stacked high. Some of it looked like junk, and some of it looked, well, strange. The most eye-catching thing was a large box, sitting in the far corner of the basement. It was sealed shut with thick, weathered rope, and there was a note taped to it, written in a hurried, slanted hand. "Leave it alone." I stared at the box for a moment, my heart beating a little faster. There was something about it that made my skin crawl. It didn't look like it belonged in this house. It didn't look like it belonged in any house. It was out of place. I felt a strange pull to it, like I should open it, but the note stopped me. My mind raced, wondering who had written it and why. But even as I thought about walking over and seeing what was inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was a terrible idea. I turned to look at the others, who were now standing just inside the basement door. They were looking around, equally unsure of what to do. But as I glanced back at the box, I noticed something. It had moved. It wasn't by much, but it had shifted. I could see the rope was tighter around it than before, and it seemed just a little further from the wall than it had been when we first entered. I didn't know if I was imagining it, but it made my heart skip a beat. The air felt heavier now, colder. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off the box. "Let's go," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. I couldn't explain why, but my instincts were screaming at me to leave. Right now. We all turned and began climbing the stairs, but as I reached the top step, I heard it. A soft whisper, so faint I almost thought I imagined it. But then it came again, clearer this time. "Come back." I froze. The others didn't seem to hear it, or if they did, they didn't react. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe for a second. I felt like someone was standing right behind me, their breath cold against my neck. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to go back down there, but I had to. I had to make sure we were all out. We were safe. The basement door slammed shut behind me, and I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. We didn't go back down to the basement after that. We spent the rest of the weekend avoiding it, even though the thought of it kept creeping into my mind. Every time I passed by the door, I felt like something was watching me, waiting for me to go back. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed down there, that whatever it was had woken up, and it was waiting for us to return. When we left on Sunday afternoon, I glanced at the basement door one last time. The house felt different now, heavier, more oppressive. I don't know what it was, but I know that I don't want to ever find out. We never mentioned the basement again during the rest of the trip, and none of us ever spoke of it after we left. But as I was packing up my car, I noticed something strange. A newspaper clipping, yellowed with age, was wedged in the door of my car. I pulled it out and stared at it. It was from the 1960s, and the headline read, "Missing Family Found in Farmhouse Basement." The article was mostly faded, but the words "sealed box" stood out clearly. I don't know if it was a coincidence or if someone had put it there on purpose, but I knew one thing for sure. We had made the right choice by never going back down there. As we drove away, I felt a sense of relief, but I also felt something else. An unease, a nagging feeling that whatever was down in that basement was still waiting, still watching, still waiting for someone to come back. But I never will, and neither will any of us. I had been looking forward to this weekend for months. After a stressful few weeks at work, I felt like I needed to get away from everything. The constant buzzing of my phone, the noise, the never-ending rush of life. So when I found the listing for a charming little cabin in the middle of nowhere, it seemed like the perfect escape. The place was advertised as a cozy retreat, surrounded by nothing but trees, tucked away far from the nearest town. Just the solitude I needed. The photos on the Airbnb listing made the cabin look quaint, with wooden beams, a stone fireplace, and a large front porch that overlooked a field of wildflowers. The reviews were glowing, with people describing it as peaceful and serene. I had a strong feeling this would be the perfect spot to unplug, take some time for myself, and simply breathe. When I arrived late Friday afternoon, the sun was just starting to dip behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the woods. The drive had taken longer than I expected, the narrow roads winding through dense forest. But when I finally pulled up to the cabin, it felt like I had entered another world. No cars, no people, just trees and silence. I was ready for peace. The cabin was even more beautiful in person. The woods smelled faintly of pine, and there was a welcoming warmth to the place despite the cool evening air. The host had left a note on the counter, welcoming me and giving instructions on the house's quirks. I unpacked my bag, made myself a cup of tea, and settled down in front of the fireplace. It was so quiet, so still. The kind of quiet that made you aware of every little noise, even your own breathing. That first night was peaceful. The wind outside picked up a little, making the branches scrape gently against the windows, but nothing too alarming. I was enjoying the simple calm. The bed was comfortable, and after reading for a while, I drifted off into a deep sleep. But around midnight, I was jolted awake by a noise. It was faint at first, just a creak, like the house settling. I didn't think much of it and rolled over, pulling the covers up to my chin. But then it came again, a soft thud, followed by what sounded like footsteps, slow, deliberate. Step, pause, step, pause. I sat up, confused and a little anxious. Was it an animal outside? Maybe a deer or a raccoon? The sound seemed too deliberate for an animal. It sounded like someone was walking up in the attic. I sat in the dark, straining my ears. The footsteps continued, and now it sounded like something heavier, maybe furniture, being dragged around. A dresser? A chair? I tried to shake off the rising panic. Could be the house settling further, right? Old homes creak and groan. But the dragging sound, it didn't sit right. It was too consistent, too methodical. Something wasn't right. I got out of bed and checked the windows, hoping to see something outside. Anything that would explain the noise. I looked into the dark expanse of the woods but saw nothing. No movement, no shadow, no sign of life. Just the stillness of the night. The footsteps above me continued, louder now, as if whatever it was pacing back and forth, taking its time. I felt my heart rate increase, the back of my neck prickling with unease. Something was wrong. I grabbed my phone and called the host, hoping for reassurance. But the call went straight to voicemail. I tried again, my hand shaking, but still no answer. I left a message, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Why wasn't the host answering at this hour? The noise continued for what felt like hours. I couldn't bring myself to sleep with the constant sounds above me, each creak and shuffle sending my nerves into overdrive. I grabbed my flashlight and tried to gather the courage to go up into the attic. If someone was up there, I wanted to know what the hell was going on. If it was just an animal, I would feel stupid, but at least I would know. I crept up the narrow stairs that led to the attic. The old wood creaked beneath my feet, the air musty and thick with the smell of aged wood. The door to the attic was slightly ajar. I hesitated, my hand gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles turned white. But I couldn't just stand there. I had to see what was causing those noises. I pushed the door open slowly, the hinges groaning as it swung wide. The attic was dimly lit by the faint beam of my flashlight. At first glance, it appeared empty. There were piles of old, dusty furniture scattered about. An old chair, a few wooden crates, a broken dresser, but nothing that would explain the noises. The air was damp, the wood floors slick with moisture, and there was a strange, musty smell that made my stomach churn. I scanned the room with the flashlight, but there was no sign of anyone or anything that could have made the noises. But the more I looked around, the more uneasy I became. There was something off about the place. The smell was the first thing that got to me. Old, stale, like it had been closed up for years. And then, I noticed something odd. There was a small rug in the corner, and the floor underneath it was stained darker than the rest of the wood. It wasn't something I wanted to investigate too closely, but the image stuck in my mind. I had no idea how long that stain had been there, but it didn't feel right. I stepped back toward the door, my nerves frayed, when I heard it again, a soft shuffle. But this time it came from behind me. My breath caught in my throat, and I spun around, but the attic was still empty. Nothing, no movement. I must have imagined it. Maybe I was just freaking myself out, but that strange feeling lingered. I couldn't take it anymore. My heart was racing, my mind running wild with possibilities. I quickly turned off the flashlight, slammed the door shut, and fled down the stairs. I didn't care how crazy it sounded. I wasn't going to stay in that cabin another minute. I spent the rest of the night in my car, parked under the dim glow of the cabin's porch light, the engine running to keep the heater on. The night felt endless, every small sound outside making my heart skip. I kept checking my phone for any response from the host, but there was nothing. The next morning, the sun finally broke through the trees, casting a warm light across the landscape. It should have been a relief, but the sense of unease was still heavy in my chest. I decided to wait until the host replied before making any decisions, but I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to stay another night. Around noon, I finally got a message from the host, apologizing for the disturbance. Oh, I should have mentioned, the message read, the previous tenant left some of his things in the attic. He was an artist, and I think he just left a few things behind. It was almost as if they were brushing it off, like it was no big deal. Couldn't believe it. The idea that the host knew about this, and didn't even mention it, made me feel sick to my stomach. How could they not tell me there was someone else's stuff in the attic, especially when there were noises like that? What kind of person doesn't warn their guests about that? I didn't bother responding to the message. I packed up my things quickly, too anxious to stay in the cabin any longer. I didn't care about the rest of my reservation. I was leaving. I didn't want to be anywhere near that place again. Felt wrong. The smell, the noise, the feeling of being watched. Everything about that night told me I needed to go. I checked out early, leaving the key in the lockbox as instructed. As I drove away, the cabin grew smaller in the rearview mirror, its outline framed by the trees. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, but there was also a lingering unease I couldn't shake. I kept thinking about that stain on the floor, the smell, the way the attic seemed off. Something wasn't right, and I knew I didn't want to stick around long enough to find out what. I made a vow to myself that I would never rent a cabin again without making sure I knew everything about it, every little detail. I learned my lesson the hard way. Some things, some places are best left unexplored. I'd gotten my weekend getaway, but it wasn't the relaxing retreat I had hoped for. It was a nightmare wrapped in the quiet of the woods. I was in Jakarta for a study tour, and my classmate and I had been tasked with sharing accommodation for the duration of our trip. As part of the trip's preparations, I had booked us a place through AIRBNB, thinking it would make things easier since it was close to the university where we were supposed to attend lectures and meetings. I had done some research on the property, and the pictures on the listing made it look like a comfortable, clean, and decent place to stay. The reviews from previous guests seemed fine, and everything seemed well organized. Felt like the perfect spot. In the lead up to our stay, however, things started to feel off. I tried contacting the host several times through the Airbnb app and through the phone number they had provided in the listing, but there was no response. I sent polite, respectful messages asking for confirmation about the check-in time and for any details about the key pickup. I didn't get any replies, and I started feeling uneasy. The day we were supposed to check in, I tried calling again, hoping to get some clarity. Finally, the host picked up the phone. She sounded distracted, and her voice had an apologetic tone. She told me she was out of town and that she had completely forgotten we would be arriving that day. I was taken aback, but I tried to remain patient and understanding. She said she would make arrangements to have someone meet us at the building with the key. I could tell from the way she spoke that she wasn't entirely sure of the details herself, but she promised it would be sorted out. She told me that the key handover would be at a specific time, so I tried to relax and trusted that everything would be fine. When we arrived at the apartment building later that day, it felt strange right from the start. It was located in a relatively quiet part of Jakarta, not far from the university, but the neighborhood wasn't as bustling as I had imagined it would be. The building itself looked older and somewhat run down, but it wasn't terrible, just a bit underwhelming compared to the images I had seen online. We waited in the lobby for an hour, but the guy with the key didn't show up at the scheduled time. At first, I wasn't sure if something had gone wrong, but I tried to stay calm, thinking that maybe he was just running late. I tried calling the host again, but the phone rang out. I tried to message her on Airbnb, but I got no response. My classmate, who was equally frustrated, started pacing around, clearly annoyed by the delay. After another half hour, the guy finally showed up. He didn't speak any English, and the moment he walked in, I could tell that he wasn't the owner of the apartment. He didn't seem to have any real knowledge of what was going on, and I felt a growing sense of discomfort. He handed us the key and led us up to the apartment, but there was something off about his demeanor. He was polite enough, but he didn't make any effort to explain things, and it seemed like he was in a rush to leave. He unlocked the door, pushed it open, and left us there without so much as a word. I stood there for a moment, still holding the key, trying to process everything that was happening. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was certain it wasn't what we had been promised. My classmate and I stepped into the apartment, and the moment I walked in, I could tell something was wrong. The apartment didn't look anything like the one in the listing pictures. The walls were faded, and there were marks on the floor where furniture had clearly been dragged around. The air was heavy and stale, and I immediately noticed that the air conditioning, which was supposed to be one of the major selling points of the place, wasn't working. There was a faint musty smell in the air, but I tried to ignore it. I walked into the bathroom to check it out, and that's when the situation went from bad to worse. The bathroom was disgusting. The tiles on the walls were grimy, with black mold growing in the corners. The shower had long strands of hair stuck in the drain, and there was a layer of grime along the edges of the tub. I wanted to leave immediately, but I tried to stay calm, not wanting to make my classmate feel like I was overreacting. But as I turned to check the bed, things only got worse. The bed was a disaster. The mattress was stained in several places, and it looked like it hadn't been cleaned or changed in weeks. The pillows were yellowed, and one of them had a noticeable tear in it. There weren't any sheets or blankets on the bed, just the bare mattress. I stared at it for a few moments, trying to convince myself that maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But the longer I looked at it, the more disgusted I became. This was not what we had paid for. I could feel my heart racing, and I immediately felt like we needed to get out of there. Just as we were processing how bad the situation was, there was a knock at the door. It was the guy who had shown us to the apartment. He handed us a garbage bag, and inside it were 2 old fleece blankets. They smelled foul and looked like they hadn't been washed in a long time. Couldn't believe it. How was this supposed to be a place for travelers? We were being treated like we didn't matter, and I could feel the anger rising inside me. My classmate looked just as appalled as I felt. We needed to leave. The apartment was in no condition to stay in, and the last thing we wanted was to spend the night in that filth. We had a meeting at the university to attend, so we decided to leave and check into a nearby hotel. We grabbed our things and left the apartment quickly, not even bothering to say goodbye to the guy. The hallway smelled like stale smoke, and as we passed through the building, we noticed cockroaches scurrying across the floor. When we reached the lobby, a massive rat darted across the floor in front of us. I was disgusted and scared. This was not what I had expected at all. As we stepped outside and took a deep breath of fresh air, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach. We contacted the host immediately, explaining the situation and telling her that we would not be staying at the apartment due to the condition of the place. I sent her a message on Airbnb, but she ignored it. I tried calling, but she didn't answer. It became clear that she wasn't interested in addressing the issue, and I started to feel frustrated and helpless. I was in a foreign country with no idea how to fix this problem, and I wasn't about to let it ruin the rest of my trip. We checked into a nearby hotel, and it felt like a relief to be in a clean, comfortable room. The contrast between the Airbnb apartment and the hotel couldn't have been more stark. It made me realize just how bad things had been, and I couldn't help but feel betrayed by the host. I expected a certain standard of accommodation when I booked through Airbnb, and what we received was far from acceptable. I raised the issue with Airbnb customer support, hoping they would do something to resolve the situation. To their credit, they were very responsive. Once they realized what had happened, they apologized profusely for the experience. They offered a full refund for the stay, and I appreciated that they took the matter seriously. However, the whole ordeal left me with a bad taste in my mouth. I had used Airbnb once before, and it was a fantastic experience. I had been so excited to use it again for this trip, but now I wasn't sure if I would ever feel comfortable booking through the platform again. I kept thinking about how easily something like this could happen to anyone. The lack of communication, the disregard for basic cleanliness, and the sheer negligence of the host made me question whether I could trust the platform in the future. It was a disappointing experience, but it didn't ruin my entire trip. I was still able to attend the meetings at the university and enjoy the rest of my time in Jakarta, but the stress of dealing with the Airbnb situation stayed with me. In the end, I learned a valuable lesson about the importance of doing more thorough research before booking a place, and I realized that sometimes things just don't go as planned. It made me more cautious about where I stay in the future, and it definitely made me think twice about using Airbnb again anytime soon. I rented a beautiful Victorian apartment in the city for a solo retreat. I needed time away from the chaos of daily life, a peaceful break where I could clear my head and unwind. The place looked perfect on the listing: high ceilings, antique furniture, and a charming old-world atmosphere that immediately appealed to me. It felt like stepping back in time, something I had always wanted to experience. The apartment was located in a quiet area of the city, tucked away on a tree-lined street, and the building itself was well-maintained, standing proudly among a row of similar historic homes. It had a certain elegance to it, a touch of class that modern buildings just didn't offer. As soon as I walked in, I was taken aback by how lovely everything was. The hardwood floors creaked slightly underfoot, and the furniture was beautifully aged, with that distinct scent of old wood and leather that you can't get from modern pieces. There were tapestries on the walls, faded slightly from time, but still breathtaking in their detail. The lighting was soft, coming from tall windows with heavy velvet curtains that framed the view of the quiet street outside. Everything about the apartment radiated a warmth that immediately made me feel at home. However, there was one feature in the apartment that unsettled me. A large, ornate mirror hanging in the hallway. It wasn't the kind of thing that would normally catch my eye. In fact, it seemed to blend in perfectly with the other vintage pieces. But something about it was different. The frame was intricate, gilded with delicate patterns of vines and flowers. The mirror itself was old, the glass slightly cloudy in places, with the edges tarnished by years of use. It was beautiful, yes, but there was something off about it. A sense of unease I couldn't shake every time I passed by it. First, I brushed it off. It was just a mirror, after all. But every time I walked by, I couldn't help but glance at it. I don't know why, but it felt like something was watching me through the reflection. It was subtle, just a sense of being observed, but it was enough to make me pause for a moment, then hurry on my way. The feeling became more pronounced the longer I stayed. The mirror seemed to draw me in, as if it was calling to me, making me feel like I had to look into it, just for a second, even though I didn't want to. On the second night, I decided to stay in and relax. I had planned on exploring the city, but the quiet solitude of the apartment was enough of an escape. I dimmed the lights, lit a few candles, and settled into the plush armchair near the fireplace. There was a book I had been meaning to read, and I figured it would be the perfect time to dive into it. The apartment felt cozy, peaceful even, and for a while, I forgot about the strange feeling I'd been getting from the mirror. But as the evening wore on, I found myself drawn to it again. Each time I walked by, I couldn't resist a glance. At first, everything seemed normal, just my reflection, the hallway behind me. But the longer I looked, the more I started to notice little things. The room in the reflection wasn't quite the same as the one I was standing in. The shadows on the floor looked wrong, as though they were cast in a different direction than the light sources in the apartment. The details of the hallway, the furniture, the paintings on the walls, they didn't match up exactly with what I saw in real life. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was just imagining things, that the mirror's age was playing tricks on me. But every time I looked, the differences grew more apparent. It was subtle at first, just a slight shift in the angle of the shadows or a piece of furniture that didn't look quite right. But then it started to get worse. I could swear that something was moving in the reflection that wasn't moving in the room. It was like there was a presence in the mirror, something out of place. I told myself I was tired. Maybe I was just seeing things, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Around midnight, I decided to turn in. I was exhausted from the day, and I figured I could sleep off whatever weird sensations I was feeling. I turned off the lights and crawled into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the candles I had left burning in the living room. For a moment, I tried to relax, but my mind kept drifting back to the mirror. I didn't know why, it was just a reflection after all. But then, something happened that I couldn't explain. As I lay in the dark, trying to calm my mind, I saw something in the mirror. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I had just turned off the lights, and my eyes were still adjusting to the dark. But when I looked, there it was, a figure standing right behind me. It was hard to make out at first, just a dark shape, but the longer I stared, the clearer it became. It was a person, tall with long dark hair, and it was staring at me. My heart skipped a beat. I spun around in the bed, expecting to see someone standing there, but the room was empty. I turned back to the mirror, and the figure was still there, standing motionless in the reflection, just a few feet away. It didn't move. It didn't even blink. It was like it was waiting for me to notice. I froze, unable to look away. Panic surged through me. My breath caught in my throat. There was no way anyone could have gotten into the apartment without me hearing them. The front door had been locked, and the only other way in was through the window in the living room, which was also closed. The figure in the mirror wasn't real, at least I didn't think it was. But there it was, staring at me, unmoving. I scrambled out of bed, my heart racing in my chest, and rushed into the hallway. There was no one there. The hallway was just as empty as it had been before. I hurried back to the mirror, and the figure was gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It felt like the apartment was holding its breath, as if it was waiting for something to happen. I called the host immediately, hoping for some kind of explanation. But the line went dead again. I tried to call several times, but each time the line was silent. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. What the hell was going on? I didn't know what to do. The apartment felt different now, like it had changed somehow. The peaceful, charming place I had rented for a retreat now seemed oppressive, suffocating. I couldn't stay another night. I couldn't even bring myself to stay another minute. I grabbed my things, packed up as quickly as I could, and left. I didn't even bother with the checkout process. I just left the keys on the kitchen counter and walked out the door. The street was quiet, and the city seemed so far away from the strange, unsettling energy I had felt in that apartment. I went straight to the nearest hotel and booked a room for the night. I barely slept, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what had happened. The next morning, I called the host again, but they never picked up. I sent an email, but never received a response. I don't know what I expected them to say, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about that apartment. Something I couldn't explain. I haven't stayed in a place with mirrors like that since. I don't know what I saw that night or why it happened, but I'm certain of one thing. I never want to experience it again.